I never intended to be the kind of bride who would make her fiancé drop to his knees, not in a proposal, but in utter ruin. But life has a strange way of hijacking your narrative when you're looking the other way. The evening before I was supposed to get married, destiny served me a bitter truth I hadn't ordered, and on my wedding day, I planned to return the favor. But before I get into the details, I just want to pause and say thank you for being here and listening. If these kinds of stories about taking back your power resonate with you, I'd love it if you'd subscribe. It costs nothing, and it really helps this community grow. Now let's get into it. For 3 years, Julian Croft and I were a team. On the surface, he was the complete package. Handsome, charismatic, and born into a family with a sterling reputation. His mother, Eleanor, had become the maternal figure I'd lost after my own parents passed away. His sister, Chloe, felt more like a soulmate than a future sister-in-law. It was a perfect picture, or at least that's what I'd led myself to believe. His bachelor party was held at the Majestic Hotel, a stone's throw from the penthouse we shared. I had no intention of going near the place that night, but I'd forgotten to give Julian his grandfather's cufflinks, which Eleanor had specifically asked him to wear for the wedding. The staff at the Majestic knew me on sight. Julian and I had chaired several galas there. They waved me through to the exclusive private lounge without a second thought. And that's when I heard it. Julian's unmistakable laugh, followed by the words that would detonate my entire existence. "Come on, Julian. You're not actually going to chain yourself to Alara, are you?" His best man, Liam, his voice slurring just enough to carry down the hall. "Why not? She's perfect, at least on paper," Julian shot back, his own words thick with alcohol. "Her inheritance will be a huge boost for Croft Holdings, and her family's name opens doors. Plus, the woman is completely wrapped around my finger." Laughter echoed from the room, but it was his next sentence that froze the blood in my veins. "She's a placeholder anyway, just until someone more fitting for the long haul comes into the picture." I stood frozen in the hallway, the small velvet box with the cufflinks clutched in my hand, as my reality disintegrated. 3 years of shared moments replayed in my mind, now grotesquely recontextualized. The sudden late-night work emergencies, the last-minute canceled dates, the subtle ways he'd always steered my choices to his benefit. It all clicked into place. It all made a horrible kind of sense, but tears never came. Instead, something cold and clear settled deep in my gut. I went straight back to our apartment and flipped open my laptop. As Julian's business partner, I had a key to every digital door: emails, financial statements, client lists. 4 hours later, I had a war chest of evidence, enough to obliterate not just his heart, but the entire empire he'd built on lies. The morning of my wedding dawned with an unnerving calm. My hands were steady as I did my makeup, a chilling departure from the joyful trembling I'd always envisioned for this day. The proof I'd compiled was sealed in a thick, cream-colored envelope tucked away in my bridal suite. Eleanor swept into the room, her eyes shining with a mother's pride. "Alara, my dear, the flowers are here, and they are simply breathtaking." She presented my bouquet of white gardenias and pale pink roses, completely unaware that it was destined to be an accessory to a takedown, not a celebration of love. As my bridesmaids floated around me in their soft, champagne-hued dresses, I saw Chloe's reflection in the mirror. Julian's sister was behind me, carefully adjusting my veil with a gentleness that made my stomach twist. For a second, my resolve faltered. Just for a second. "I can't believe how lucky my brother is," Chloe murmured, giving my shoulders a squeeze. "You're going to leave him speechless." "If only you knew just how right you are," I thought, holding my practiced, serene smile. The next hour was a whirlwind of hairspray, final lipstick applications, and toasts of champagne that I couldn't stomach. Every time my phone vibrated, my pulse jumped, not with bridal nerves, but with the thrill of the hunt. My private investigator had confirmed he'd have the final pieces by noon. At 11:43 a.m., I got the text. Additional documentation secured. Media contact is on site. I excused myself to the restroom, my phone gripped in a hand that now trembled slightly. The screenshots he sent were the final confirmation. Julian's hidden offshore accounts, the siphoned company money, and the most damning of all emails to his mistress, outlining their travel plans for after the honeymoon. The mistress, as it turned out, was Isabel Thorne, a member of his own company's board of directors. A soft knock on the door made me jump. "Elara?" "The planner says we have about 30 minutes, Chloe's voice called through the wood. "Just wrapping up," I called back, my voice miraculously even despite the hurricane inside me. I took a final look at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back was not the same one who'd been writing her wedding vows just yesterday, her eyes blurry with happy tears. This woman wore her wedding gown like a suit of armor, and her scarlet lipstick like war paint. When I stepped out, Eleanor pulled me close. "I want you to have this," she said, fastening a stunning pearl necklace around my neck. "It's been in the Croft family for generations. Julian's grandmother wore it at her wedding." The pearls felt like tiny chips of ice against my skin, another piece of family history about to be caught in the crossfire. "Thank you, Eleanor," I whispered, embracing her. "I need you to remember, no matter what unfolds today, that you've been more of a mother to me than I ever could have wished for." She gave me a puzzled look, but before she could ask, the wedding planner bustled in. "Places, everyone?" "The guests are all seated, and the groom is waiting at the altar." My bridesmaids lined up, their excitement almost buzzing in the air. Chloe gave my cheek a quick kiss before she took her spot at the head of the line. I waited for them to leave, then retrieved the envelope and slid it into a hidden pocket my seamstress had added to my dress. The grand church doors closed, leaving me alone in the narthex. I could hear the faint, elegant notes of Pachelbel's canon, the very song Julian and I had picked out together on a cozy, rainy afternoon months ago. My phone buzzed one last time. "Reporter and photographer are in position. All business partners are in attendance. Law enforcement contact is on standby." I deleted the entire thread and put the phone away. The coordinator appeared at my side, her smile a beacon of professional cheer. "Ready, Ms. Vance?" I thought about the first time I met Julian, how his smile seemed to illuminate the entire ballroom. I thought of our first kiss in a downpour, the way he proposed under a blanket of Tuscan stars, and all the dreams we had woven together. Then I thought of his sneering laughter from the night before, the years of calculated deceit. The church doors swung open, the wedding march swelled, and 200 people turned in their pews. At the far end of the aisle, Julian stood, impossibly handsome in his custom tuxedo, his face beaming with that well-rehearsed charm. He had no clue that in a matter of minutes, that smile would be gone, shattered along with his reputation, his company, and his entire fabricated world. I took my first step, my bouquet held tight. The slight weight of the envelope against my leg was a constant reminder. This wasn't a walk to the altar. It was a countdown to detonation. "Yes," I told the coordinator, my voice like silk wrapped around steel. "I'm ready." Every step down that long aisle was punctuated by flashes of memory, moments I'd once cherished, now exposed as scenes in a meticulously staged play. The whispered compliments of beautiful bride from the guests felt like acid on my skin. Julian's smile widened as I drew closer, his confidence absolute, the flawless mask of a con man who believes he's won. 3 steps from the altar, I met Liam's gaze in the front pew. His smug expression wavered as I held his stare, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Beside him sat Isabel Thorne, looking impeccable in a designer dress that I knew was funded by embezzled company money. 2 steps away, I saw Eleanor dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Chloe was beaming from the line of bridesmaids. Seeing them, a pang of regret hit me, knowing they were about to be casualties in Julian's self-made war. One final step. "You look breathtaking," Julian whispered, his hand reaching for mine. I pulled back just an inch, just enough. The priest cleared his throat to start, but I turned to face the congregation. I reached into the hidden pocket of my dress, and the sound of the envelope seal being broken seemed to thunder in the sudden, expectant silence. Before we get started, my voice rang out, clear and amplified by the church's acoustics. I'd like to share a few special readings. Not from scripture, but from Julian's personal emails, specifically the ones he's been sending to Isabel Thorne throughout our engagement. The blood drained from Julian's face. In the front row, Isabel went rigid, and a wave of confused muttering spread through the pews. "My dearest Isabel," I began reading, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. "Once this wedding is over and Alara's trust fund is integrated, we can move forward with our plan. She doesn't suspect a thing." The muttering intensified. Julian took a step toward me, hissing my name, but I sidestepped him, pulling out more documents. "Oh, but there's so much more," I announced, my smile feeling sharp enough to draw blood. "Would anyone be interested in hearing about the secret offshore accounts? Or maybe the fraudulent accounting practices at Croft Holdings? Don't worry, I have copies for everyone, including the federal agents who should be arriving right about now." As if on cue, the heavy church doors swung open, revealing 2 figures in dark suits. "No," Julian choked out, lunging for the papers. I was ready for it. I let the documents fly, watching them drift down like poisonous confetti, each page a testament to his corruption. The photographer I'd hired, disguised as a guest, captured it all, the rapid-fire clicks of his camera, the only sound in the stunned silence. "Ilara, please!" Julian snarled, grabbing my arm. "We can discuss this." I ripped my arm from his grasp, turning to face him with the full force of my fury. "Discuss what? Like how you discussed me at your bachelor party. I was just a placeholder, wasn't I? Until someone more fitting came along?" His face went from deathly pale to a mottled gray. In the front row, Liam was desperately trying to become invisible. "I trusted you," I said, my voice resonating through the silent church. "I loved you, and all you saw was a business opportunity, a stepping stone." Eleanor was on her feet now, her expression a mask of dawning horror. "Julian, what is she talking about? Mother, I can explain the embezzlement?" I cut him off. "The affair? The hostile takeover you planned that would have destroyed dozens of families? Please, Julian, explain to all of us, right now, who you really are." The agents were at the altar now. Isabel had already bolted through a side exit, but I knew she wouldn't get far. A second team was waiting for her outside. "You've ruined me," Julian spat, his charming facade finally crumbling to dust. I smiled and reached up, unclasping the Croft family pearls. "No, Julian, you did this all on your own. I'm just the one who turned on the lights." The moments that followed were pure chaos. The agents moved in, Chloe was openly sobbing, and Eleanor stood frozen, a statue of disbelief. Guests were a mix of fleeing the scene and recording the drama on their phones. Through it all, I stood my ground, a calm island in the storm, watching Julian's world burn. As they led him away in handcuffs, he turned back one last time. "I did love you, in my own way. Your way." I stepped closer, my voice low and venomous. Your way was never going to be enough. Consider this my wedding gift to you. The truth." I turned and walked back up the aisle, alone, my head high. Behind me, the sounds were a symphony of destruction. Eleanor's choked sobs, the relentless clicking of cameras, and the rising tide of shocked whispers. But ahead of me was freedom, justice, and the deep, satisfying knowledge that sometimes karma needs a little push. The bright sunlight was almost blinding as I pushed open the church doors to face a flash flood of reporters. My final touch. As their questions washed over me, I smiled. It wasn't the fairy tale I had dreamed of, but it was something far better. It was justice. The weeks that followed were like a highlight reel from a movie I'd never auditioned for. Headlines blared, Croft empire implodes, and jilted bride exposes billion-dollar fraud. My phone became a constant source of buzzing, a mix of supportive messages from strangers and requests from journalists hungry for every last detail of how a bride-to-be dismantled one of the city's most powerful dynasties. I was now living in a new apartment with a view of the park, a place I chose because Julian had always sneered at it as being new money. The irony was delicious. My laptop screen showed the latest development. Julian and Isabel were officially indicted on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The evidence I'd gathered had been the key that unlocked a Pandora's box of corporate crime. Chloe's calls were a daily ritual, her voice a fragile tightrope walk between anger at me and despair over her brother. "Why didn't you just tell me, Alara?" she'd plead. "I could have done something." But we both knew that wasn't true. Her loyalty to Julian had always been her Achilles heel. Eleanor's reaction was the one that truly stunned me. 3 days after the wedding that wasn't, she showed up at my new apartment holding a familiar velvet box. "The pearls," she said, her voice steady as she held them out to me. "They belong with you." "Eleanor, I can't." "You chose truth," she cut me off, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute. "That makes you more a part of this family's honor than anyone who wore them before." We sat on my brand-new sofa sipping tea. The silence between us was thick with things we couldn't say. "I failed him," she finally whispered. "Somewhere, I must have gone wrong." "No," I said, taking her hand. "Julian made his own choices. You gave him everything he needed to be a good person. He just chose not to be." The investigation into Croft Holdings unearthed a legacy of corruption deeper than I could have imagined. Julian's father had set the stage years prior. Julian had simply perfected the performance. The company's sudden collapse left hundreds of employees in the lurch, but I'd anticipated that. Anonymous tips from a concerned source had prompted many of them to move their retirement funds weeks before the scandal hit. Liam tried to reach out once, a pathetic attempt to save his own reputation. His message went unread, filed away with Julian's increasingly desperate emails. Some fires are best left to burn out on their own. Isabel, predictably, cut a deal and turned state's evidence. She'd always been a pragmatist. Her testimony would guarantee that Julian would trade his custom-tailored suits for a prison jumpsuit for a very long time. The media cast me as a vigilante heroine, the whistleblower bride. They didn't grasp that it was never a choice. The second I heard Julian's words, my path was set. Love without respect is just a beautifully decorated cage. In the wake of it all, my own consulting firm began to flourish. Prospective clients, it turned out, were very interested in working with someone who had demonstrated such a radical commitment to ethical integrity. The ultimate irony. Julian's scheme to use me for my connections had backfired, catapulting me to a level of success he could only have dreamed of. A month after the non-wedding, I received a handwritten letter from Julian's grandmother. Over 3 pages, she wrote about her own marriage, about watching Julian lose his way, and finally, about her profound gratitude to me for stopping the family name from becoming irreversibly tied to corruption. "You did what the rest of us were too afraid to do," she wrote. "You saw the truth and refused to turn away." Tucked inside was a photo of Julian's grandfather on his wedding day, his eyes full of hope, the same hope I'd once seen in Julian before it curdled into greed. I kept the photo, not as a memento, but as a reminder that the most charming masks can hide the most monstrous intentions. As summer bled into autumn, I started taking long walks in the park. The turning leaves felt like a reflection of my own transformation. Painful, yes, but essential for new growth. Each step was a step away from the woman who nearly married a lie and towards someone stronger, wiser, and unafraid to be alone. Eleanor often joined me. We never spoke his name, but Julian's absence was a constant presence between us, a strange bond connecting two women who had loved and lost the same man in entirely different ways. "You know," she said on one of those walks, "I always hoped for a daughter who would embody the Croft legacy of strength and integrity. I suppose I got one, just not in the way I ever imagined." I squeezed her hand. In his attempt to ruin me, Julian had accidentally given me the one thing I'd always longed for: a family bound not by name or obligation, but by truth. The media frenzy eventually died down, but the lesson stuck. Sometimes the greatest declaration of love isn't saying "I do." It's having the courage to say "I won't." 6 months after the wedding that never was, I found myself standing outside the former headquarters of Croft Holdings. The building's sleek glass facade was the same, but the name etched above the entrance was new. A delicious twist of fate had brought me here. I'd been hired as a consultant to help the new owners restructure the company. They wanted to understand how such deep-seated corruption had gone undetected for so long. And who better to ask than the woman who'd single-handedly brought it all to light? Walking the familiar hallways, I passed what used to be Julian's office. The imposing mahogany doors were gone, replaced by transparent glass walls that let sunlight flood into a space that had once been steeped in shadow. It was a fitting metaphor. Chloe had stayed on, taking charge of a small, legitimate division of the company, fiercely determined to rebuild her family's name the right way. Our friendship, slowly mended, was now forged in something stronger than shared joy. It was tempered by shared adversity. "The quarterly reports show a remarkable turnaround," she announced at a board meeting, her voice clear and confident. "We've retained 80% of the workforce and implemented every recommended transparency protocol." I watched her with a surge of pride, remembering the tear-filled conversations we'd had just months ago as she uncovered more and more of her brother's deceptions. Each new lie, instead of breaking her, had only hardened her resolve. The press called it the Croft Redemption, a story of corporate rebirth led by the very women Julian had so foolishly underestimated. Eleanor, emerging from her initial shock, had become a powerful advocate for corporate accountability, leveraging her social standing to champion ethical business practices. My own firm had expanded, specializing in fraud prevention. Companies now sought us out, desperate to avoid becoming the next front-page cautionary tale. The investigation had triggered a domino effect, exposing a network of corruption that implicated several other prominent families. Julian's exclusive circle had crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. Isabel's detailed testimony had been the prosecution's ace. She laid out a map of secret meetings, destroyed records, and hidden accounts. Her cooperation got her a reduced sentence, but her name would forever be linked to the scandal. Liam had tried to rebrand himself as a concerned whistleblower, but no one was buying it. The last I heard, he'd retreated to a small town somewhere, his social climbing aspirations crushed. Julian's trial was scheduled for the spring. His lawyers tried every trick in the book to delay, but the wheels of justice, once set in motion, were relentless. I was subpoenaed to testify, a prospect that filled me with a complex mix of dread and resolve. One evening, an unexpected call came from Julian's grandmother. "I've been looking through old family albums," she said, her voice thin with age. "There's something I think you should see." Over dinner, she showed me photos of Julian as a boy, a smiling, innocent child full of potential, before greed and ambition poisoned the well. "I watched him change," she confided, her fingers tracing the edge of a faded photograph. "With every success, he became a little less himself." "You saw it too, didn't you? Long before the rest of us." I nodded, thinking of all the small, dismissive gestures and cruel asides I had chosen to ignore. "The Croft name used to stand for something," she said, closing the album. "Thanks to you, Chloe and Eleanor, maybe it can again." Driving home that night, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold, I thought about legacy, not just the Crofts, but my own. By choosing to tell the truth, I had started a chain reaction of positive change. The wedding dress still hung in the back of my closet, a stark white ghost. It was no longer a reminder of a broken heart, but of a reclaimed life. Strength, clarity, and the hard-won knowledge that the best kind of revenge isn't destruction, but reconstruction, building something better from the ashes. Julian's betrayal had inadvertently led me to my life's work. In trying to use me as a stepping stone, he had placed me on a path to my true calling. The night before my wedding, I overheard a truth that shattered my world. Now, 6 months later, I had helped build a new one. Spring arrived, and with it, the trial. The air in the courtroom crackled with tension as I took the stand. My voice was steady as I recounted every detail, every lie. Julian's eyes were fixed on me throughout my testimony, but they held no power over me anymore. I saw him not as the man I once loved, but as a man defeated by his own reflection. The evidence was irrefutable. Each document I'd printed that night became another nail in his legal coffin. His defense team tried to paint me as a scorned woman seeking revenge, but the paper trail told a story of methodical, calculated fraud. The most powerful moment of the trial came when Eleanor testified. She sat with perfect posture, the picture of elegance, and calmly detailed how her son had betrayed not only the company, but generations of family trust. "The truth," she stated, her voice ringing through the silent courtroom, "must always stand above blood." At her words, Julian's face finally crumpled. For the first time, I saw raw, genuine pain break through his mask. The devastating realization that he had lost not just his company and his freedom, but the one person whose love had always been unconditional. The trial lasted 3 weeks. With each passing day, more of Julian's intricate web of deceit was unraveled. The verdict was delivered on a rainy Thursday, guilty on all counts. The sentence, 15 years in a federal prison with no chance of early parole. As the judge read the terms, I looked at Julian. He was still handsome, but diminished, like a photograph that had been left out in the sun. The charming smile was gone. Rebecca, in exchange for her testimony, received 5 years. She avoided my eyes as they led her away. Liam got off with a plea deal, but his reputation was in tatters. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Eleanor stepped up to the microphones with Chloe and me at her side. "The Croft family has always valued integrity," she announced, her voice unwavering. "Today's verdict, while deeply painful, honors that value. We thank the jury and are grateful that justice has been served. That evening, the three of us gathered at Eleanor's townhouse. It wasn't a wake, it was a closing ceremony. Chloe opened a bottle of vintage champagne, the same kind we were supposed to have at the wedding. To truth, she toasted, her eyes meeting mine, and to the sister I almost had, who ended up being more of a sister than my own brother ever was. As we sipped the champagne, Eleanor took my hand. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said at the altar," she mused. "You chose truth over love, but in doing so, you showed the greatest kind of love there is. Love for what is right." As the evening went on, our conversation shifted from the painful past to the hopeful future. Claire talked about her plans for the remaining businesses. Eleanor spoke of a foundation she was starting to promote ethics in business education. Driving home, the city skyline glittering against the night, I felt a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying finally lift. Julian's sentence wasn't just his ending. It was my permission to truly begin again. My phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number, a photo of Julian in his prison uniform being led down a corridor. The text below it read, "Justice served. Thought you should see this." I deleted it without a second thought. My victory wasn't in seeing him brought low. It was in my own freedom. The wedding dress, that ghost in my closet, was finally packed up and donated to a charity for survivors of domestic abuse. The symbolism was potent. What was once intended to be a symbol of a fraudulent love would now help other women write their own stories of escape and redemption. That night, I thought about the naive girl who once dreamed of being Mrs. Croft. Julian had mistaken her trust for weakness, never realizing it was the source of a strength that would become his undoing. The truth had cost me a wedding, but it had given me back myself. And that was a trade I would make again in a heartbeat. The greatest love story, I realized, wasn't about finding a partner. It was about finding the courage to stand up for yourself. A year after Julian's conviction, I found myself back at the Majestic Hotel. Not as a nervous bride-to-be, but as the keynote speaker for a national conference on corporate ethics. The irony was not lost on me. The ballroom was filled with executives, all there to hear from the woman who took down a titan. As I walked onto the stage, my heels clicking on the polished floor, I felt completely transformed. "Good morning," I began. "You're all here to learn how to prevent corruption. But what you really need to learn is how to recognize the truth, especially when it's hidden behind a perfect smile." In the front row, Eleanor and Chloe watched me, their faces beaming with pride. Chloe had successfully rebuilt the legitimate parts of the Croft assets into a new, thriving company focused on sustainable enterprise. Eleanor's foundation was already funding ethics programs in major universities. "The greatest danger to a company's integrity," I continued, "isn't always an outside threat. Sometimes it's the charismatic CEO, the trusted partner, or even the person you plan to build a life with." My consulting firm was now global, with offices in New York, London, and Singapore. After my speech, a young woman approached me, her hands trembling. "I'm engaged to my company's CFO," she whispered, "and I think I found something, irregularities in the accounts. After hearing you, I looked into her frightened eyes and saw a reflection of my former self. "Telling the truth never gets easier," I told her gently, "but living with a lie becomes impossible once you know it's there." By the end of the week, another corporate scandal had been quietly averted. She sent me a thank you note a month later, signed with her maiden name. My story had become a case study, a beacon. I even guest lectured at business schools. Chloe joined my firm as a partner, her first-hand experience in rebuilding a company from the ashes of scandal proving invaluable. "I used to think Julian was the strong one," she said one night as we worked late. "But I was wrong. Real strength isn't about holding on to power. It's about having the courage to do what's right, no matter the cost." Diana's foundation created a scholarship in the name of Harrison's grandmother, who had passed away peacefully a few months after his sentencing. Her last message to me was simple: "You saved our family's soul." The media had moved on, but my life had found its purpose. It was no longer about revenge. It was about prevention. Julian's appeals were all denied. The evidence was simply too airtight. And then my life took another unexpected turn. I was giving a lecture at Columbia when I met him. Professor David Reed, a visiting academic from Stanford specializing in corporate responsibility. After my talk, he approached me. "Ms. Vance, your real-world experience could completely change how we teach business ethics. Have you ever considered collaborating on a curriculum?" There was an authenticity to him, a genuine passion that was utterly disarming. Eleanor noticed it immediately. "He looks at you," she remarked after a foundation meeting, "not as a prize, but as an equal." Our professional collaboration blossomed into long conversations over coffee, then dinner. He never pushed. He understood my past and respected the armor it had forced me to build. Chloe teased me endlessly. "It's okay to be happy again, Alara, to trust." But trust was a high-stakes game I was reluctant to play. One evening, I told David everything, not the headlines, but the raw, painful truth. His response was simple: "Thank you for trusting me with that. It couldn't have been easy." Months passed. Our ethics curriculum was being adopted by schools nationwide. One rainy night in Central Park, David stopped under a large oak tree. "What amazes me about you, Alara," he said, "isn't just your strength, but your courage to remain open to possibility, even after everything you've been through." He looked at me, and I saw what Eleanor had seen from the start. "The truth is," he continued softly, "I've fallen in love with you. Not the legend, but the real, brilliant, compassionate woman. I'm not asking for anything, just the chance to show you that love can be honest." Standing there, I felt a flicker of something I thought was gone for good: hope. Not the naive kind, but a stronger, more resilient version. When I finally admitted I was dating again, Chloe and Eleanor were thrilled. "Life brings us what we need," Eleanor said, squeezing my hand. "Sometimes it's the courage to expose a lie, and sometimes it's the strength to embrace a new truth." We made our relationship public at the Foundation's annual gala, held, of course, at the Majestic. As David and I danced, I realized how far I'd come. "You're thinking about that night, aren't you?" he murmured. "Yes," I admitted, "but not with pain. That night led me here, to you." He smiled. To quote a famous speech I once heard, "The truth doesn't always give you the ending you want, but it leads you to the one you need." Across the room, Eleanor raised her glass in a silent toast. "The best revenge isn't destroying what hurt you. It's building something beautiful from the lessons it taught you." The truth that had shattered my world had ultimately led me to a love that was transparent, steady, and real. 3 years to the day after I was supposed to marry Julian, I stood before a mirror in a different white dress. This one was simpler, more elegant, a reflection of the woman I had become. Eleanor adjusted my veil, her eyes shining. This time she whispered, "It's all exactly as it should be." Chloe burst in with champagne. "David is practically levitating out there, and half the business school is here to see their favorite professors get married." We weren't in a grand cathedral. We chose the botanical gardens where David and I had spent countless hours walking and talking. The guest list was small, intimate, and real. Eleanor held out the velvet box with the Croft pearls. Once a symbol of a corrupt dynasty, they now represented transformation. Actually, I said, gently closing the box, I think these belong to the foundation now. A reminder of where we've all been and how far we've come. Her eyes filled with tears. You truly are the daughter I was meant to have. The ceremony was everything my first was not. Authentic and filled with joy. David's vows spoke of partnership, not possession. My vows acknowledged the painful journey that had led me to this perfect moment. Love, I said, looking into his steady eyes, is about choosing truth over comfort and finding someone who makes that choice with you every single day. At the reception, Claire raised her glass. To my sister, not by blood, but by choice, who taught us that the greatest love story isn't about finding the right person, but becoming the right person. And to David, who proves that true love doesn't ask you to compromise your values, it elevates them. Later, as we danced, David whispered, "Do you ever think about how different your life would be if you hadn't overheard him that night?" I looked around the room, at my family, my purpose, and the man who loved me not in spite of my past, but because of it. That night didn't change my destiny, I replied. It revealed it. We'd heard Julian was up for a parole review, but it felt like news from another lifetime. The woman who walked away from a false dream had found something profoundly real. As the evening ended, Eleanor gave me a small gift, Julian's grandmother's diary. She wrote about choosing truth over convenience, Eleanor explained. You haven't just continued her legacy, you've reinvented it. The revenge I once craved had morphed into something far more powerful. Redemption, not just for me, but for everyone our story had touched. The truth that had shattered my world had piece by piece made it whole again. And as David smiled at me, I knew that the best endings aren't the ones we plan, but the ones we earn. 5 years after that fateful night, I stood at a podium at Stanford. The faces in the auditorium were the next generation of business leaders. David, now the head of the ethics department, sat in the front row. This would be the last time I told this story. A student raised her hand. Ms. Reed, why stop now? I smiled, my hand resting on my slightly rounded stomach, a secret still ours for a little while longer. Because some stories need to end so new ones can begin. Afterward, Chloe perched on my desk. Julian is up for parole next month, she said quietly. He's asked if we'll speak for him. The news no longer held a sting. Will you? I asked. I might, she admitted. He's different. The letters he writes. They're from the brother I always wished I had. Eleanor had visited him over the years, witnessing his slow, painful transformation. He'd started counseling other inmates, using my own ethics curriculum as a teaching tool. That night, I wrote a letter to the parole board. The man I was supposed to marry chose deception, I wrote. The man you are considering for parole has chosen to face that truth. In the end, that is all any of us can do. Choose truth again and again. At the Foundation's gala, I looked out at the faces in the crowd. Students turned leaders, whistleblowers with new careers, families rebuilt from ashes. 5 years ago, I thought revenge was about destruction, I concluded in my speech. Now I know it's about building something better. The greatest revenge isn't watching someone fall. It's helping others rise. Later, walking with David in the botanical gardens, I thought about the journey. You know what I love about our story? He said, his hand in mine. It was never really about revenge. It was about truth finding its way to the surface, like a flower breaking through concrete. The night I thought was my end was just the beginning of a better story, a story about choosing growth over vengeance and a love that proved itself every day. Exactly 6 years after that night at the Majestic, an invitation arrived. Harrison had been released. Eleanor was hosting a small family dinner. He wanted to make formal amends. David squeezed my hand as we pulled up to the townhouse. Our daughter Lily slept in her car seat, a peaceful symbol of my new life. Chloe met us at the door. "He's different," she whispered. "Really." Harrison stood when we entered. Prison had stripped away his polish, leaving something raw and real. His eyes were clear, direct. "Ilara," he said softly, then corrected himself. "Mrs. Reed, thank you for coming." During a quiet dinner, he spoke of his work in prison, helping other white-collar criminals understand the human cost of their actions. "Your foundation's work reached us inside," he said. "I taught your ethics curriculum, never telling them the main case study was my own life." After dinner, he read from a worn piece of paper. "Dear Ilara," he began, "thank you. Not for stopping me, but for forcing me to see who I was. The night before our wedding, you heard the truth about me then. Tonight, I want you to know the truth of who I am now." Just then, Lily woke with a small cry. I lifted her to my shoulder, and Harrison's gaze softened. "The Croft name once stood for power at any price," he continued, his eyes on my daughter. "Thanks to you, Chloe, and my mother, it now stands for integrity. The greatest gift you gave me was showing me a better way to live." As the evening ended, he knelt by Lily's bassinet. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Your mother taught me the most important lesson of my life. I hope you grow up to be as brave and as true as she is." Walking out into the cool night air, I felt a final sense of release. The ugly truth that had once shattered my world had, in the end, healed us all. Harrison's redemption wasn't just an ending to my story of revenge. It was proof that the greatest victory isn't in destroying someone's world, but in inspiring them to build a better one. The truth hadn't just set me free, it had set us all free.